The subcommittee will come to order, and good afternoon. I first of all want to apologize to all, including our distinguished witnesses. We did have a series of votes, and fortunately, you can never plan for that, so I do apologize. Good afternoon. Today's hearing is very important, and not only because the United States government has been involved in Sudan and its various crises for the past 3 decades. Many of us first became interested in Sudan in the 1980s because of the persistent reports of modern-day slavery, in which Northern Arabs enslaved African Southerners. I would point out parenthetically, I held my first hearing when I was chairman of the Human Rights Committee when we took control in 1994 on slavery in Sudan, and we had freed slaves come and testify, and it was a very telling experience to hear them tell of the atrocities that they had suffered. My office also more recently helped to bring one of the unfortunate people who had been enslaved to America for medical treatment after he was freed, and his story affected me deeply once again. Keir Deng had been kidnapped into slavery while still a child, and while he was an adolescent, the man who held him in bondage rubbed peppers in his eyes, blinded him, and later abandoned him. Keir is studying here in the United States thanks to his benefactor, Alan Ratner, and is awaiting a second operation to help him recover at least some of his eyesight. The question always is posed, how many other Sudanese will never have that opportunity or even achieve their freedom? Keir's mother has never been freed from bondage. We began supporting Southern Sudanese efforts to end the oppression from the North in the mid-1990s. In 2005, we helped, the United States did, both North and South achieve a comprehensive peace agreement to end this long civil war and provide the steps for a mutually beneficial peace and productive coexistence. Unfortunately, the rebellion in the Darfur region distracted from efforts to fulfill that agreement. Khartoum's alliance with the Janjaweed Arabs resulted in mass killings and displacement in Darfur. An estimated 1.9 million people were displaced. More than 240,000 people were forced into neighboring Chad, and an estimated 450,000 people, nobody knows for sure what the real number is, but it's extraordinarily high, were killed. At the time, Congress insisted that this was a genocide. Eventually, the Bush administration concurred, but the United Nations declined to go so far in their terminology, calling what happened in Darfur crimes against humanity. A peace agreement between the main rebel force in Darfur and the government of Sudan was signed in May of 2006, but it did not last. In fact, no sustained agreement has been reached between the government and Darfur rebel groups, partly because these groups have continued to split and form offshoots, but also because the Khartoum government has not appeared willing to resolve the Darfur situation constructively. In June of 2005, the International Criminal Court initiated an investigation that resulted in arrest warrants for Sudanese President Omar Bashir and 3 other government officials and militia leaders. None of these warrants have been served, none of the 4 have been taken into custody, and the government of Sudan has refused to cooperate with the ICC. Meanwhile, the CPA remained unimplemented. In January of 2011, South Sudan, which had been a semi-autonomous region of the country since the signing of the CPA, voted in a referendum on whether to remain part of Sudan or become independent. Having been marginalized and mistreated for decades, it was not surprising that Southern Sudanese voted overwhelmingly at the level of 98.8% to become an independent nation. On July 9, 2011, South Sudan became the world's newest nation. However, these unimplemented elements of the CPA would bedevil the new country from its birth. A referendum in the disputed Abyei region and consultations on the status of Sudan's southern Kordofan and Blue Nile states were never completed. In May of 2011, Sudanese armed forces assumed control of the towns in Abyei, quickly forcing at least 40,000 residents to flee. Within weeks, fighting spread to southern Kordofan and Blue Nile states as Khartoum sought to crush the Sudan People's Liberation Army, North, which had fought with Southerners in the North-South Civil War. Northern attacks on residents in those areas continued unabated. Last year, Sudan and South Sudan engaged in a conflict over oil supplies from the south, involving allegations that Khartoum was undercounting the level of oil flow to cheat South Sudan, as well as the southern seizure of the oil town of Heglig. Again, this dispute was largely the result of unresolved issues from the CPA. South Sudan continues to be engaged in a conflict that began last December, despite a cessation of hostilities agreement. Thousands have been killed, tens of thousands have been displaced. Exact figures are constantly shifting because this conflict continues. I will soon introduce a resolution offering a sequenced approach to reaching a lasting solution to this newest crisis. This conflict also is a result of too little attention paid to the warning signs because of a preoccupation with one of the many other crises in the two Sudans. Over the last 3 decades, I and other members of the subcommittee and subcommittee chairs have held numerous hearings on Sudan, and of course, we've all traveled there. Mr. Wolf, who is joining us from the Appropriations Committee, was there back in 1989, and I think even before that, but certainly in 1989, it's been a steadfast voice and a power in trying to bring relief to that troubled region. In fact, too often, however, each crisis is seen as a problem unto itself when these things break out, unrelated to other issues, and we move on to other things, it seems, even notwithstanding the good work of our special envoy. In fact, successive administrations and Congresses, advocacy groups and humanitarian organizations have focused so much on individual crises and issues that no one has created a panoramic view, which shows us all the individual crises and how they interrelate with each other. This stovepiping of government policy and public attention and focus and prioritization has meant that long-term solutions have been neglected while short-term eruptions have had to be dealt with. In reality, the two Sudans are inexorably linked, and no crisis in either can be resolved successfully without taking into account the entire Sudan and South Sudan panorama. We must end this cycle of myopic policy formulation based on the crisis of the moment and adopt a longer-term holistic vision of what the best interest of the people of Sudan and South Sudan demands, indeed what would be in the best interest of the entire region. As we have learned in our subcommittee hearings on the Sahel crisis last May, Islamic extremists have their sights set on making inroads wherever there is conflict across the belt of Central Africa, stretching from Senegal to Sudan and beyond. Continuing unrest in the two Sudans only serves to provide training grounds or bases of operation for terrorists. Hardened ethnic conflicts can spread to long-term enmity that no peace agreement alone can resolve. Hopefully, this will not be the case in South Sudan, but that conflict is headed in that ominous direction. 2 years ago, I held a hearing in my office, a meeting, I should say, in my office, with representatives from Sudan's Nubian, Darfuri, BJ, and Nuba communities, who all believe that Khartoum is engaged in a long-term effort to exterminate non-Arab Sudanese. Have we missed such a pernicious campaign while hopping from one crisis to another as each appeared? The purpose of today's hearing is to examine current U.S. policy towards Sudan and South Sudan to see how we can unify our policy in order to more effectively and long-term running tragedies that appear to get worse despite all the attention to which we pay them. This involves more than what the Department of State and other executive agencies do, and even what Congress can do. Advocacy and humanitarian organizations also must join the government in seeing the forest and not just the trees, so to speak. And let me also say the importance of engaging the faith community remains a very important component if we are to bring or help bring a lasting and sustainable peace to that troubled part of the world. I'd like to now yield to my friend and colleague, Ms. Bass, for any opening comments.
Thank you.